This video is going to be about determining types of slopes. So your learning target is I can identify whether the rate of change is positive, negative, zero, or undefined from a graph, a table, or an equation. Rate of change, which is also called slope, and you're going to hear us call it slope a lot, so you need to be understanding that they're the same thing, is defined as a ratio between the vertical and horizontal changes between 2 points on a line. Essentially, it's how does it rise and run. So think about a rooftop of a house. They usually have a slope. And so you would think of it as how much does that roof rise versus how much it runs. So the vertical distance over the horizontal distance. And we'll be talking more specifically about how to determine slope in terms of values at a later time. This video is just going to show you the 4 types of slopes that you can see, and you're going to have to be able to identify whether it's a positive, negative, zero, or undefined slope. So let's start with a positive slope. So a positive slope, I'm going to draw a coordinate grid here, so just pretty much just an axis. How you know if a line is positive from a graph is it's going to rise from left to right. So it's going to do something like this. That's a positive slope because it has a positive rise and a positive run. Looking at the table, how are you going to know if something is a positive slope? Is you're going to compare your y's and your x's. So if I look at my y's, my y values, which are right here, if I look how the difference between -1 and 1 is. So -1 goes to 1, positive 2. And 1 goes to 3, positive 2. And if you look at your x's, these are all increasing by 1. So they're the same. And so we can say that this has a positive slope. And looking at the equation, this equation is not an equation that matches that table or the graph. So it's just an equation. But looking at an equation or a rule where it's y equals, you want to look at what's attached to the x value, the variable, the independent variable. So if I look here, that's what's attached to the independent variable of x, which is positive 1/2, which tells us a positive slope. If you remember from last video, y equals b plus mx, m is your rate of change. So if it's a positive slope, you're going to put a plus there. Looking at the negative slope now, a negative slope, when graphed, does the opposite of what the positive does. So it's going to rise right to left or fall left to right. So this is going to be a negative slope. In that line, either the rise is negative or the run is negative. And again, we'll talk about more specifically in a different video. Looking at the table, you're going to look at your y values and your x values. So 2 to 1, you're subtracting 1. 1 to 0, you're subtracting 1. And again, these are going up by 1, so that's what we have to pay attention to, that those are consistent. So this has a negative slope. And looking at the equation, again, what's attached to the independent variable? So this right here is attached to the independent variable, so that is a negative slope. The next two are a little harder to remember. Zero slope, when graphed, has no rise. So I'll draw my coordinate grid again. So since it has no rise, it's just flat. So it looks like that. Anywhere on the grid, but it's flat. 0 has no rise. And how you can tell in your table is all of the y values are the same. They're not necessarily 0. They could be 1, 1, 1. They could be 2, 2, 2. Because what's the difference between 0 and 0? It's 0. 0 and 0. It's 0. And again, these are still 1. And so that tells me my slope is 0. And if you look at the equation, there's no x. There's nothing there. So it is a 0 slope. And now the last one, undefined. What makes something undefined is when you divide by 0. And so that tells us an undefined slope has no run. It only has a rise. So an undefined slope is going to just have a rise. So it's just going to go up and down. It has no run. And looking at the table, if you notice the table, the y's do have things happening here, but look at your x's. Your x's differ by 0. When your x's are all the same, that's how you know you have an undefined slope. And look at that equation. That equation has no y. So when you have x equals 45 or x equals some number, you know it's going to be an up and down line, a vertical line. So now let's look at some examples. These are the type examples that you're going to see in GMM for yourself. Example number 1. Choose a word for this line slope. Don't let it trick you because remember, the slope is attached to the independent variable. So the slope is sitting right here. And since there is nothing out in front of it, as we know from solving, then we can assume it's a plus sign. So this has a positive slope. Example number 2 gives you a table. What type of slope does this relation have? So if we look, these are all going up. They're the same. Since they're the same, that's a vertical line, which means that it is an undefined slope. Example 3, it says which word describes this slope? It's a graph. And so since it is dropping from left to right, that is a negative slope. And the last example, it says choose a relation with a positive slope. So if we're looking across here, we can eliminate this one because look, this has all x's. So we know that this is undefined. So it's not that one. We can eliminate this one because that has these are all going up by 0, right? So this has a 0 slope. Now let's look at the next 2 that we haven't eliminated. The x's are all going up by 1. Notice these are all going up by 1. So it doesn't matter with the y's now. Let's look at the y's. So from -2 to 2, you are adding 4. 2 to 6, you are adding 4. And if you look at the other one, so that looks like it's it because it's positive. If you look at the other one, 0 to -4 is you're subtracting 4. -4 to -8, you're subtracting 4. So that this one here is negative. And so this is my correct answer. This one right here. Okay, so that's it. So you're looking at equations, tables, and graphs. So now, here are 4 your turns. I would like you to give these your best shot. They're not hard. You can do this. And we'll start here in class. Have a good night.